Now we'll start the discussion with our ExCo champions about their work, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. Before we move to this, again, let me remind everyone that on Thursday we'll hear from our committee chairs, and they will provide an update on their work, and this also includes on strategic themes of conduct and culture, operational resilience, and financial inclusion, we're not covered today. We've also allowed for up to an hour for questions and answers on the committee's work, so please come prepared with your questions. We'll also weave in questions that we receive from you today that might be relevant to those topics. With that, back to today's session, and let me turn first to Daniel Wang, our sustainability champion and chair of our climate risk steering group. Now, Daniel, we will be publishing 2 papers on climate risk for consultation, perhaps as early as next week. Can you provide some insights into what the draft application papers will consider?
Certainly. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone listening in. So this will be our 4th and last consultation relating to a comprehensive set of supervisory and supporting materials that seeks to embed climate-related risks into our members' supervisory practices, and of course, ultimately in the risk management and business practices of licensed insurance companies. As Jonathan alluded to, it will cover 2 papers in this 4th consultation. So firstly, the application paper on public disclosure and supervisory reporting will cover developments in climate-related risk disclosures in light of work done by the ISSB and published national frameworks in several jurisdictions. More specifically, this application paper will provide practicable guidance on effective climate-related risk disclosures and supervisory reporting regimes, while recognizing that current data and other challenges, still remain. But indeed, we are trying to put in a first step and in the efforts to do so. We will also be undertaking member-only work to explore and assess relevant indicators and metrics that can further capture and measure climate-related risks in the insurance sector. The second draft application material considers how to assess climate-related risks in the light of the IAIS's ICPs on macroprudential supervision, that will be ICP 24, in the context of supervisory cooperation and coordination, ICP 25. So this material complements existing supporting material and focuses on issues specific to climate-related risks.
Thanks very much, Daniel. And of course, another big focus of the IAIS's work has been on climate risk scenario analysis. Can you maybe update us a bit on that?
Oh, yes. So the work stream within the Climate Risk Steering Group, looking at scenario analysis, is currently finalizing the application paper following last year's public consultation. So we have been really grateful for the feedback we received from more than 20 different organizations. So at the workstream, it is continuing to provide a platform as well for emerging good practices in scenario analysis. This includes engaging with IPPC climate scientists to look at emerging climate scientific research and understanding the extent to which escalating climate risks are effectively being captured in economic models. Through this whole process, we have been very grateful for the engagement with a wide range of stakeholders, insurance companies, academia, NGOs, and so on. So we are also now presently considering the issue of compound risk and how these might be assessed. So some of this guidance and material will be forthcoming.
Thanks. And lastly, maybe we've got a number of streams going on, and one is the draft application paper on climate risk market conduct issues in the insurance sector. Can you maybe give a bit of an update on how your group is taking forward the feedback on that draft application paper?
So that draft application paper was publicly sent out for public consultation last November. Just to remind everyone, it covered, among other things, greenwashing risks of insurers who may be promoting their sustainability profile to attract clients. So on that particular consultation, we have since received about 20 plus responses to the consultation with quite a interesting set and wide range of views. So we are also aware that the responses from the insurance sector had flagged some concerns about the potential regulatory burden imposed by some of the information and guidance provided in the paper. So we are also currently taking on some of these feedback and making edits to the paper, and the hope and the objective is to publish the final version as part of the consolidated climate related material package before, at the end of this year. There's just 2 points I'd like to clarify at this particular juncture. So greenwashing risk is not a new risk per se, and the application paper that, like I said, will eventually be part of that consolidated package actually does not set out any new requirements. It provides advice, illustrations, recommendations, and quite importantly, examples of good practices to supervisors on how the supervisory material may be implemented. Frankly speaking, at this juncture, we do not see widespread greenwashing at this stage. However, as supervisors, we certainly need to continue to be vigilant on this risk.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel, for those updates. And now I'm very pleased to warmly welcome Petra Hilkema, who is our EXCO FinTech champion and chair of our FinTech forum. Welcome, Petra. Maybe you could tell us a bit about the FinTech forum's work on the very topical issue of artificial intelligence.
Yes, happy to do so. Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Happy to give an update. We are, I think, in good process on our way to publication of a consultation by the end of the year on AI. Maybe you remember last year we looked into how the ICPs, do they need change or not in order to be able to supervise ICPs, AIs. We concluded not, but we did conclude that we needed some additional work on the how then to actually do it. So it's a very practical process. It's a supervisory process. It's a good interaction between colleagues. And the focus of the paper is to look at features that are unique to artificial intelligence. So in the context of the following topics, we look at governance and accountability, which is of course very important. Also robustness, safety, security, absolutely relevant. Then we move on to looking into transparency and accountability when these AI models and tools are used. And finally, we look, of course, also at the fairness, the ethics, and the possibility for redress for consumers. So these will be chapters in the paper that we are drafting. And of course, we do that with the community of supervisors, but we are also very grateful for the engagement that we have received from consumer representatives, from the insurance industry, also from trade associations and others. And if you are in the call today and you contributed, then I thank you very much for that. We also work very closely with other standard settings, given the cross-cutting nature of these issues. And for example, the FSB is currently very much also focused on AI financial stability risks. But also the FSI within the BIS is a very good partner in this work. Now, we will consider what further work may be required from an insurance perspective, specific following the publication of the consultation. So also hearing from you, but we need to see what is the impact of AI on the industry, what is the use, and then also how can we further develop how we supervise that, and how can we make clear to you also what we expect.
That's great. And you mentioned how do we supervise AI and the impact of technology, and of course that may actually also mean supervisors themselves have to do more to adopt technology in their supervision. And I know the forum is also looking at the use of supervisory technology or SupTech. Maybe you can share a bit more about that with our participants.
Yes, I can. So subtests, what do we do ourselves besides learning from each other and developing our thoughts, is also use tools, develop tools. And I think here again, the IAIS is a wonderful space to exchange with each other what is happening in that area in all the authorities that are at the table. Subtech has the potential to support more effective and more efficient supervision, so it's highly relevant. And therefore, the forum now will focus on broader supervisory digitalization programs, and we will do that through a survey. Unlike previous times, it will not just be a survey like, can you share some subtech developments, but we really want to focus on what was a successful project, what was a successful implementation, and why was that successful? So what are the ingredients of successful SupTech tools in proof of concept, but then also being used full and bringing benefits and indeed effectiveness and efficiency to supervision. We're on our way doing that, and also here I hope towards the end of the year to have some results.
Excellent. Well, look forward to that. That's going to be very interesting. And thank you very much for that update. And now we continue our speed date of ExCo champions on our strategic themes. And I'll turn to Gerry Cross, who is our ExCo champion on diversity, equity and inclusion. And of course, Gerry, a busy year on the DE&I front with two draft application papers out for consultation. And maybe you want to share a bit more on that with members and stakeholders.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for the opportunity, and good morning, afternoon and evening to everyone. And first of all, apologies, I'm in transit, so maybe a bit of background noise. I hope it doesn't interfere. So yes, diversity, equity, inclusion, really important strategic theme of the IAIS. And I think one where we have made really good progress. And that includes, Jonathan, as you mentioned, those two application papers that are currently out for consultation. And as I read those papers and engage with them, what strikes me about them is that they're really practical, really impactful, and really useful, both for supervisors and I think for those in the insurance sector itself. So really, really positive progress. The first one, the first consultation, if you like, is internally focused on the internal operations of the firm. And it covers how diversity, equity, and inclusion within an insurance institution can influence its governance, its risk management, and its culture. And the paper starts by setting out the benefits of embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion within an insurer's, and indeed actually a supervisor's own organization. And those benefits include embedding better challenge, better decision-making, and really importantly, I think, reducing that tendency to groupthink that can arise in any organization over time. It sets out then very practically ways of considering whether or not diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives are being well embedded within the firm. And then, and I think very importantly, it sets out issues that can arise within firms that as supervisors are engaging with firms, and indeed as the firms themselves are thinking about issues where you can see that the root cause can be to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion problems. And we're enhancing the approach to DEI to drive the desired change. For example, if there's a lack of challenge, if there are over-dominant personalities, if there's pure communication between different levels, if there's resistance to change, if there's persistent breaches of regulatory expectations, all of that can find themselves enhanced by a focus on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also sets out the things that you can look for if you're seeing whether or not DEI is being well embedded within a firm. So, for example, if there's a lack of clear accountability, maybe weak or stagnant DEI metrics, the issue of all talk, no substance, that sort of DEI washing, So very helpful again in terms of setting out things to look at in that regard. And then a very helpful consideration of the things that supervisors can do to bring about improvement. So it's a really powerful package. And as you say, I think that's going to bring moving progress. That's the first consultation, the internal one. Then the external one, if you like, recently published, and again, really recommended to people to engage with. It addresses how expectations for fair treatment of customers can be implemented. That's ICP 19, how that can be implemented to achieve better outcomes for diverse customers. And this is a valuable and really outcomes-focused piece of work. And actually, as Queen Maxima was speaking earlier and Shigeru was speaking, it's very much in line with what the IAIS is trying to do amongst its overall aim, which is the fulfillment of insurance's social license in respect of delivering for society and the wider community. So the application paper, as I say, is based in ICP 19, Insurance Core Principle 19, which requires the fair treatment of customers. And it explores how considerations of diversity and equity and inclusion are really key when you're trying to fulfill those requirements for fair treatment. So it roots itself in the fact that, for example, risk-based pricing is at the heart of insurance. And it is for commercial decision-making of firms to determine what business models, products, and markets they wish to forget. So it takes very squarely the idea that, yes, these things, risk-based pricing and commercial decision-making, are absolutely at the heart of a successful insurance company and sector. But within this freedom, the paper, I think, really helpfully identifies the challenges that can arise to treat customers fairly and to avoid unfair outcomes. So those unfair outcomes can include, being sold products that do not meet your needs, being unable to engage effectively with the distribution and sales process, having your behaviors or vulnerabilities perhaps taken advantage of at the margins, or not having access to important insurance products, again, as Queen Maxima referred to. So the paper takes the life cycle approach. It looks at the governance of the firm, the product development, distribution, and the after sales of products, and articulates sound and less sound practices when it comes to delivering fair treatment for diverse customers. So really two very powerful, very impactful pieces of work by the IAIS. I'll stop there, Dr.
Great, thanks, Gerry. So two very concrete examples of how our statement about the importance of embedding DE&I within the insurance sector can be taken forward, but also for the association, we need to sort of walk the talk as a membership association. Maybe you can share a bit about the DE&I work that we are undertaking within the association.
Happy to do so, Jonathan. And I should say, I took over as DEI champion maybe 18 months ago from Helen Roll of the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, and much of the heavy lifting had already been done. But what I think is really impressive is how that idea of the strategic importance of DEI, both in terms of our engagement with the industry and stakeholders, our engagement with membership, and our engagement within the IAIS Secretariat, as it were, has really driven sort of concrete changes that I think, when we stand back from it, have made the whole operation of the IAIS more successful. So, for example, during 2023, I think really substantial progress made around concretizing, crystallizing the commitment to DEI within our own internal policies and processes. For example, expectations for ExCo members to set that tone from the top. And that really matters in all the things we talk about with firms, that tone from the top, as well as the message from the middle, of course, but the tone from the top really important. I think it's become embedded much more in our overall ExCo language and the way of articulating things. In how we form committees and select chairs and vice chairs, are we meeting the requirements of DEI? In our approach to stakeholder engagement, in the extra support to foster inclusion of new IAIS members and emerging market and developing economy members. And then very importantly, and this is really important, publishing more DEI data in the end of year review. A lot of this can be very helpfully supported by the right data presented and managed in the right way. And then looking forward, Jonathan, I think we've come on such a good journey so far in this. It's now we're into that kind of mature stage, I think, where it'll be about taking the work that's been done and really embedding it and realizing the benefits for the wider community of all the work that has been done. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerry, and thanks to all our EXCO champions for the really interesting updates. And now I'm going to turn to the vice chairs and our chair for some other areas of our work. And I'll start with Siam Ramlee, who is vice chair of EXCO with a specific mandate around bringing the voice of emerging market and developing economy members to the table. So Siam, you act as an advocate for EMDEs across the IAS. Can you tell me what the focus has been for our work during this first half of 2024?
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to act as EMD's advocate and to see all the progress that has been made so far. Emerging markets and developing economies make up a significant part of our members' jurisdictions. In this sense, the IAS has strengthened its ongoing work with EMD through several activities. First, there is a good engagement across the EMDE, whether through the regular EMD call, which provide a platform for supervisors to discuss emerging issues and trends affecting their jurisdiction and to connect with our implementation partners to discuss opportunities to address knowledge gaps and build supervisory skills. So we have also enhanced the closer coordination with regional coordinators and regional outreach. The IAS has supported regional seminar in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we are currently planning further regional engagement in Asia, Latin America, and Central Eastern Europe and Transcaucasia. The IAS has also established several forums through which supervisors can exchange views on priority topics and benefit from supervisory knowledge and experiences. There is views on priority topics and benefit from supervisory knowledge and experience, and there is a continued sharing and engagement on topics such as financial inclusion, financial crime, fintech and digital innovation, and other emerging risks and trends. And I would like to welcome the ongoing work of the Risk-Based Solvency Implementation Forum, which is nearing finalization and will provide members with a range of examples of implementing risk-based solvency regimes. On the process of developing the SPFU, I would like to point out that this process has been very inclusive. It was very important to capture EMD views through this process, so we held dedicated and productive exchanges with EMDs on potential future projects and activities under the next strategic plan. Before concluding, I would like to thank the IAS implementation partners with whom we have a fruitful cooperation and who play a key role in the IAS engagement with EMD members. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Siam. And you mentioned our engagement on the strategic plan, which is a good segue to my next question, which goes to Andrew Mays. And Andy, welcome. And in addition to, of course, being the current president of the NEIC, congratulations also on recently becoming a vice chair of the IAIS Executive Committee. You know the IAS very well. You've been a member for a number of years, but now in your vice chair role, much more involved in helping to set the strategic vision for the IAS. Could you perhaps say a little about our work to finalize the next 5-year strategic plan?
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for the Secretariat and all the work they've done in making sure that I've been able to work as vice chair. As you know, I think as all of us as stakeholders know, the strategic plan was developed through a rigorous process of debate and engagement that started back in 2023, early 2023. We've had several touch points with members and stakeholders throughout the process, and that has shaped the plan so it could be responsive to the period in which we find ourselves. Now, the 2025 to 2029 period follows an intensive standard setting period for the IAIS. That included adopting a revised set of ICPs and the holistic framework in 2019, as well as developing the ICS, which, as we've heard previously, is scheduled for adoption as a prescribed capital requirement of IIGs at the end of this year. Now it's time to build on those milestone achievements, and the IIS is about to enter a period of ongoing maintenance and refinement of those standards. Our focus here at the IAIS will now shift to a greater emphasis on supporting comprehensive and globally consistent implementation of the supervisory materials, as well as a continued vigilance in assessing the key risks and the trends that affect the global insurance sector. Overall, this strategic plan presents an evolution rather than a revolution for the IIS. In this 5-year period, this coming 5-year period, we will maintain our core objectives. Those include monitoring and responding to the key risks and trends, as I just mentioned, setting and maintaining those globally recognized standards, sharing good supervisory practices, and facilitating capacity building, which is of tremendous importance, and of course, assessing consistent implementation of the global standards. The strategic plan has also been developed cognizant of the emerging, and possible future trends expected to shape the insurance landscape for the next 5 years. And trends, I could identify some like climate change and rapid digital innovation. And both of those have been identified as strategic themes that have the potential to significantly impact or perhaps even reshape the insurance industry. Now, alongside those two themes, IIS will focus on a third strategic theme, and that's supporting insurance to serve its societal purpose of building resilience, as Her Majesty noted. To some degree, this is a shift in emphasis for the IIS, but many elements of that theme build on our existing work. Now, it's clear that we've set an ambitious agenda for the next 5-year period, but it is extremely important, and I have every confidence that we will be able to fulfill that. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Andy. And now I'll turn to, last but not least, the third of our vice chairs, Charlotte Gerken. Now, Charlotte, you joined us as a vice chair relatively recently and relatively new to the world of the IAIS. Certainly no stranger to the banking supervision world and the Basel Committee. But be interesting to get your thoughts or your insights as coming into the insurance side, maybe a flavor of what you've seen and the changes you expect as we move into actually operationalizing the next strategic plans.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and hello everybody. I'm delighted to be so directly involved in the IAIS now, having supported and used its work as a supervisor and policymaker for several years. The thing I wanted to highlight was something you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, under High Level Goal 1, which is really the development of the global monitoring exercise over the last few years, and really the resulting global insurance market report. And I've really been impressed by the wealth of information those global monitoring exercise discussions provide, and the quality of the global insurance market report. The exercise really provides insights which are really useful for us as individual supervisors, and it helps really enable effective discussion between supervisory authorities. So the changes to that process are now well embedded. They've already allowed us to work not only to identify risks, but address risks we see in the sector, and for us to work collaboratively with other standard setting bodies like BCBS. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. And echo those messages. And lastly, before we turn to the Q&A, I'd like to sort of look ahead a bit to the next 6 months and leading up to our meetings and our annual general meeting and our annual conference, which this year will take place in December in Cape Town. On the 5 to 6 December will be our annual conference. Now, we've got a lot of work to complete before then, but perhaps I could turn back to our chair, Shigeru, to say a little bit about what we can perhaps expect in December.
Thank you, Jonathan. I first wanted to sort of commend our South African colleagues for their intensive preparation for the AGM annual conference in Cape Town in December. And particularly myself, I very much look forward to the meeting in Cape Town and to not only have a constructive meeting, but to able to enjoy the virtue and the history of South Africa. But as all of you may have heard from our executive committee members, it is going to be a busy but productive 6 months ahead. Of course, I mentioned about the finalization of ICS, but there are also some key milestones on our work on several of our strategic themes highlighted by Andy and others. At the AGM, we will agree some changes to the ICPs based on the consultations we have already undertaken on climate, the holistic framework, and those related to solvency and valuation under ICP 14 and 17. And as always, AGM and annual conference provides an excellent opportunity for us to engage with our stakeholders. So we will continue our efforts to increase engagement with a range of topical panel discussions and roundtables on issues on which we are seeking and will seek stakeholder input. By the annual conference, we will also be able to update on the focus of our work related to our new strategic theme on the supporting insurance to serve its societal purpose of building resilience, in particular with this means for our work on financial inclusion and protection gaps. I think that the role of the insurance sector will only increase in providing or to fulfill its role on the societal responsibilities that the sector has, as highlighted by Her Majesty Queen Maxima. So very much look forward to Cape Town and to engage with all of you who are attending today. Thank you. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. And I have no bias in saying looking forward to South Africa and Cape Town in December as well. So thank you to all the panelists for the excellent update. We now actually turn to the Q&A part of our ExCo dialogue. We have some initial questions that were submitted in advance by some of our stakeholders. So we'll deal with those first before opening up the floor. And the first I'd like to turn to now is from the Geneva Association. And I think we have the Geneva Association with us. I think we have, there we go. We have Dennis Noordhoek with us from the Geneva Association. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much. And we greatly appreciate the ability to ask a question at the IAIS Executive Committee dialogue. Now, my question is in line with the third strategic theme of the IAIS new strategic plan that was just highlighted by Ariizumi-san, supporting insurers to fulfill their societal purpose in building resilience. Now, as the global standard-setting body for insurance supervision, the IAIS plays a crucial role in addressing protection gaps. Aging populations, increasing life expectancy, and declining birth rates are exacerbating the already significant gaps in retirement preparedness and protection globally. The insurance sector can play a vital role in helping societies and governments address these issues. Now, as leaders of the IAIS and the regulatory bodies in your respective jurisdictions, I've got two questions. The first one is, what specific roles do you envision for the insurance sector in addressing these retirement protection gap challenges? And how can the IAIS support these efforts? Because I'm really keen on learning more about sort of the third strategic objective. And the second question is, in light of the IAIS existing frameworks and the supervisory toolkit out there in form of ICPs and ComFrame, do you think changes and refinements are needed to allow for a balance between ensuring robust policyholder protection on the one hand and enabling the sector to deliver affordable and accessible insurance solutions to consumers in order to help reduce protection gaps? So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think I can best hand over to Shigeru, our chair, to respond on that one. Who also
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you, Dennis, for a very wise and timely question. And I first wanted to thank and congratulate you for the Geneva Association for their successful annual meeting in the historic and beautiful town of Kyoto in Japan. And thank you very much for that. And your question is a very important and challenging one. But what I can say is at the most fundamental level, getting prudential supervision right actually provides benefits, the final benefits for consumers of ensuring a resilient insurance sector. So having a resilient insurance sector is a huge benefit for the consumers themselves. In supervision, there's always a careful balance that needs to be struck between prudential, market conduct, and broader market development considerations. And these mandates can actually differ from jurisdictions to jurisdictions. The second point I want to mention is a new business model emerge. It is essential that supervisors, consistent with their mandates, as I just mentioned, assess how resilient these business models are and that they will be sustainable over time. So as we look at the developments we are seeing, for example, in the life insurance sector at present, we of course welcome any contribution from the private sector to help address the significant pension protection gap. So we will be keen to learn from any kind of input from the stakeholders. Of course, however, this only provides real benefits for consumers where these developments are sustainable. So there's always we always need to think about whether the sustainability of the business model against how to expand the business model itself. So assessment of potential risks in that regard will be at the heart of our work. And as you mentioned, the pension is a very important issue, and the pension landscape is at the same time very complex and varies significantly across jurisdictions. So there's also one in which our members have varying roles, as I mentioned. However, our Retirement Income and Pensions Forum provides a good platform for exchange for information or exchange of views for supervisors that do have the mandate in this space. So this experience to date shows that there's a lot of work that we can do in order to share experiences and learn from each other. So thank you very much for your question, Dennis.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And so the next question we have is from Consumers International, and I think it's one of the areas particularly pleased as part of our new stakeholder engagement policy to see that we've been able to put in place a much more robust process around consultation also from consumer bodies. And we have a question from Consumers International. I think we have Sonia Charak with us. Hello, Sonia.
Thank you, Jonathan and IAIS. First of all, thank you for those words, and thank you, IAIS, for this opportunity to engage with your leadership. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Charak, and I represent Consumers International, a UK-based consumer advocacy organization. While I've been attentively listening to our leaders discuss the various risks consumers face in the insurance domain, as well as IAIS's impressive recent developments as well, we at Consumers International also encounter numerous emerging consumer risks. Recently, our member in Brazil, IDEC, expressed concerns about the widespread cancellations of health insurance policies in the country. And this brings me to my question, which is in the context of insurance risk selection, what measures does IAIS recommend to ensure that the risk assessment practices are fair and non-discriminatory, particularly concerning gender, age, and socioeconomic status? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sonia. And I think that one speaks quite directly to the application paper that's been worked on by the Market Conduct Working Group. And maybe, Gerry, I can turn over to you to respond.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thanks very much, Sonia, for that question, which I think brings very nicely together this kind of question of, or the questions of the kind of the IAIS's strategic approach, the work on DEI, and the fairness of treatment of customers, and then this overall question of the outcomes. What are we all trying to achieve? So thank you for that question. I've talked a little bit about the work that's been going on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And your question kind of hones in on some key aspects of that, which I mentioned. And then maybe I'll just broaden out to look at the bigger part. So in that recent application paper, which is currently out for consultation, and I really encourage people to engage and respond to, it looks at the role of diversity and equity and inclusion imperatives, concepts, ways of thinking in achieving that imperative of fair treatment for diverse consumers. And it expands upon the premise that fair treatment of consumers requires striving for outcomes that are fair and equitable for consumers, that takes account of their circumstances and their backgrounds and their diversity. And the paper makes, as I've said, makes recommendations about how to embed fair treatment of diverse consumers into the business culture and throughout the product lifecycle. So that's the context. Now, maybe honing in a little bit, because especially relevant to the question you asked, I think there in the specific ending of it, the paper, the current consultation paper, also addresses how risk-based pricing, which is at the heart of insurance, how risk-based pricing can and must coexist with fairness considerations and diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations, and how you get that alignment right. And I think there's real value from that perspective. So, for instance, by ensuring that the latest information is being used in actuarial models and not outdated information or biased, stereotyped information that reflects certain inherent problems in its underpinning. By examining whether the use of proxy measures of risk profile, for example, postcodes, embed biases and unfair presumptions, or by adopting policies that certain less relevant or outdated information will not be considered in pricing models. For example, the right for certain previous medical diagnoses to be forgotten after a certain period, very often 5 years, which is a step that has been taken in some jurisdictions. So again, the paper is rich in assessing this issue of the interface between risk-based pricing and fair treatment and diversity. But then going to your broader question, the paper also sort of looks at this question of commercial freedom and the importance of commercial freedom of insurers to decide on their product range and their target market based on their business model, their risk appetite, and their market considerations. That's again at the heart of a successful insurance market. But again, then that can come into tension with, as you refer in your question, Sonia, to this issue that certain consumers may be left out, find themselves unable to access insurance coverage that meets their needs. And so the paper encourages insurers and gives a sort of a structured way of thinking for insurers, intermediaries, supervisors, public authorities to pursue the goal of more inclusive insurance activity. And that has in total an available and accessible range of products and services appropriate for a diverse range of consumers. And again, going back to what I said at the very beginning by Queen Maxima, the importance of insurance filling that gap that currently exists there. And again, in the paper, we set out various steps that can be taken, which are not sort of mandatory prescriptive steps, but steps that are about how to achieve those better outcomes. For example, using demographic data, community stakeholder engagement, policy holder demographic research to understand the extent to which insurance is serving diverse customer segments. And each insurer and each intermediary challenging itself to expand its product range and modify existing exclusions so that it is better meeting the circumstances and needs of diverse consumers. And then maybe the insurance industry in a certain jurisdiction or region or globally adopting a shared goal and committing to take action to broaden its inclusiveness. So there's a whole range of things that can be done to address that broader aspect of your question. So let me finish by saying, I think all of these issues are come to the surface in that currently live consultation paper, and really keen to hear, richly from stakeholders, and in particular, of course, from consumers and consumers associations like your own. And please also, little plug, please do consider joining our public background webinar on the 17th of July. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Gerry. Great, let's move to the next question, which we have from the Global Federation of Insurance Associations, GFIA. And I believe we have Susan Neely with us. Excellent, thank you, Susan, great to see you again.
Well, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My question on behalf of the Global Federation of Insurance Associations relates to the ICS, and this has already been such a productive hour and 10 minutes because I heard Shigeru say declaratively, and Andy Mays confirmed that the ICS will be finalized in Cape Town. So I bring thanks on behalf of the insurance industry. We have been pleased to support this effort through data consultation and engagement, and happy to hear that it will be finalized. I will then ask the second part of my question. Could you speak to the type of actions that will be taken regarding the ICS implementation in each jurisdiction, also in terms of any implementation assessments that will be foreseen, that you foresee?
Great. Well, I will turn, I think, to the chair of our ICS task force, also our executive committee chair, Shigeru Ariizumi. Thank you, Shigeru.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Susan, and very nice to see you, albeit virtually, and hope to see you in person very soon. But thank you very much for your question. And as you mentioned, we have been working on this ICS project for a very long amount of time, and we are at the final stage, as I mentioned, and as Andy has also mentioned in his remarks. And I am pleased to say, as I mentioned before, that we are making good progress this year with the ICS ahead of the adoption later at hopefully in Cape Town. And the ICS will serve as a consolidated risk-based measure of capital adequacy for internationally active insurance groups. And IAIS members, as I mentioned, are committed to the implementation of IAIS standards, and several members have already taken steps to embed this in their jurisdictions themselves. And the IAIS has also set high-level timelines for its plan to assess the comprehensive and consistent implementation of the ICS across jurisdictions. As Andy highlighted in the strategic plan, is an evolution rather than a revolution. And we are also moving from a period of standard setting to a period of implementation. So I think we are moving towards that direction. And the timelines recognize it will take some time for jurisdictions to finalize any necessary regulatory and supervisory changes to align with the ICS, taking into account jurisdictional circumstances, and for the IAIS ourselves to prepare for implementation assessment. The Executive Committee agreed that ICS implementation assessment will follow a two-step approach mirroring the successful model used for our implementation assessment of the holistic framework supervisory material and the IAIS standards for macroprudential supervisions that were, as you know, adopted in 2019. In 2026, the IAIS will coordinate the baseline self-assessment by IAIS members of their progress in implementing the ICS, which will serve as a baseline for future implementation progress monitoring. Then the IAIS will aim to start in-depth targeted jurisdictional assessments in 2027. So as I mentioned before, in preparation, the IAIS will begin developing a detailed ICS implementation assessment methodology in 2025, leveraging the IAIS's general principles and methodologies for assessing its standards, while taking into account the quantitative nature of the ICS. Recognizing that the assessment should not be a line-by-line exercise, the methodology will specify an appropriate level of granularity and articulate the quantitative and qualitative analysis to be used for the assessment. The IAIS will also undertake further work this year to define the need and the scope of any ICS-related data collection from insurance groups and group-wide supervisors that may be necessary to facilitate the consistent implementation of the ICS. While the scope of such potential data collection has yet to be defined, by its nature, any such data collection would be more targeted than the data collection undertaking during the monitoring period, which supported the development of the ICS. So any such further data collection will continue to be voluntary and coordinated with the data requests made in other areas of the IAIS work to avoid any duplication. So that is sort of our broad idea on how to move forward on the implementation phase. Thanks very much. Back to you, Jonathan.
Great, thank you, Shigeru, and more work on that ahead. And now we turn to another one of our very long time contributors on a consumer perspective on our work. I turn to Bernie Birnbaum from the Center for Economic Justice. Good to see you, Bernie.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you, Jonathan. And thank you for taking my question. The IAIS currently has work streams on protection gaps, climate risk, AI, fintech, DEI. So while there's always been protection gaps, insurers and reinsurers' response to climate risk have typically exacerbated these protection gaps. Market dynamics in global private reinsurance markets have challenged primary insurers in many lines of insurance around the globe to continue to provide coverage. And while insurers' massive use of big data and AI has allowed insurers to hyper-segment both the risk and profitability of individual and business consumers, that hyper-segmentation has more often than not led to a growing dispersion between the most desirable and least desirable policyholders, further exacerbating insurance availability and affordability. So my question is, how will the market conduct working groups work on vulnerable consumers relate to the IAIS work on AI, DEI, protection gaps, and climate change to ensure a holistic strategy to address these interconnected issues? So more specifically, will the market conduct working group either on its own or in collaboration with other IAS work streams, be developing issue or application papers on things like guidance for consumer market outcome supervisory data collection from insurers for more granular and effective market monitoring, as well as including assessment of consumer market outcomes in the IAS global marketing exercise. Guidance for insurer and supervisor testing of consumer market outcomes for unfair discrimination and impacts on availability and affordability, including potential limits on the use of certain types of data for certain consumer-facing functions. Analysis of the antitrust and anti-competitive dangers of third-party vendors of scoring algorithms acting as a mechanism for collusion among insurers. Assessing the supply, demand, and stability of global private reinsurance on private insurance markets and consequently climate risk, protection gaps, and availability. And finally, surveying best practices for public-private partnerships that provide public support to address market failures impacting availability and affordability and promoting investments in resilience and loss mitigation. I recognize this is a pretty big set of issues, but my general question is, what's the role of the Market Conduct Working Group to help ensure the IAS develops a holistic strategy and doesn't address these issues as silos? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bernie. So I think there's a lot there, but as you say, it's really a sort of package of issues, and I think it touches very much on the strategic theme 3 that we have for the next 5 years around the societal role of insurance, and so our work on protection gaps, our work on financial inclusion, our work on vulnerable consumers, DE&I, and all the connections there. So this is very much cross-cutting. So I'll actually turn to one of our vice chairs, I think, to give a bit of a cross-cutting response. And Andy, can I maybe turn to you? I think it's a complex question, but it's one we're looking at.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Bernie, for that question. It's been a while. It's great to see you again. And as Jonathan mentioned, it is a very complex question. I could spend the rest of the session responding to it, but let me just try to simplify this as much as I can. And I think it's important, as we've gone through our strategic priorities, as Jonathan mentioned, the themes that we will be focusing on over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, we do certainly recognize that there are interconnections across the topics that you've mentioned. And we do aim, indeed, we understand the necessity to take forward or work on them in a holistic fashion. Now, if you look at us at IAIS, our work on diverse consumers demonstrates that recognition that a population is comprised of various different types of people, and their circumstances and needs differ. It may sound basic, but that is a recognition that drives us. We carry that understanding with us as we work on topics such as the protection gaps, which, as you know, is my highest priority here at the NAIC in the US, and it's a priority for the IAIS, and on climate change, as we've seen the emerging risks that are affecting so many, and as you mentioned, Bernie, affecting many who are least capable of mitigating the damage, of addressing the concerns. As we think about the different types of the protection gaps that arise and the different reasons driving them, the different implications that climate change is having on different parts of population, we do have to figure out what methods we will use. And as I said, we have to look at this so holistically. How do we encourage that gap be addressed? How do we ensure that we as regulators allow for the type of innovation that may be a positive for consumers while not allowing for the type of discrimination and hypersegmentation that Bernie just mentioned? We do, and listen, anybody, if it was at the recent meeting, Berkshire Hathaway, that the Oracle of Omaha was talking about the use of AI in industry. And he was saying basically he didn't understand it, and he compared it, frankly, to the first nuclear weapon, but he's using it. That's where we are in so many ways. We recognize that there is opportunity, but that there is also a risk that the increased use of AI across the sector, the insurance sector, could pose risks that increase bias and discrimination. And that's why, as Bernie, just to answer one of your questions directly, Bernie, that issue will be covered in the AI application paper. Now, the jury is still out, and that's early in so many ways. So we don't really have an answer yet, but we are hoping, and we will continue to analyze the extent to which AI can be used to help address the protection gaps. And part of it is to what extent can AI change the economics of certain insurance models and products? If it can do that, it may be able to increase the availability of relevant and properly priced products, and thus reduce the protection gaps that so many in our populations across the world seem to face. I mean, equally, on the flip side, again, as you mentioned, Bernie, there is a risk that AI could provide additional data that could lead to insurers, adding exclusion, reducing risk pooling, pulling out of certain markets, which is part of the reason that both here in the US and internationally, what the IAIS or ICPs are deliberately principles-based and outcomes-focused. We recognize, as you flagged, Bernie, that there are so many issues that are cross-cutting in nature. Insurers need to be focused on ensuring good consumer outcomes. And as both you and Her Majesty have said today, so must we as regulators and supervisors, and so will we. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer.
Next, I'll turn to a question from the Institute of International Finance, from Mary Frances Monroe. Mary Frances, great to see you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon. I really appreciate the IAIS holding this session and providing the opportunity for stakeholder input and questions. My question relates to the strategic plan, and I appreciate the comments of Ariizumi-san, Commissioner Mace, and others on the strategic plan, the new strategic plan. I'd like to ask, how has the IAIS shaped the strategic plan, and how will it assess the success of the plan, or possibly make changes to the plan going forward to reflect the divergent and rapidly changing, in many cases, macroeconomic environment across IAIS member jurisdictions, as well as the evolution of insurance business models in some jurisdictions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Frances. And for that, let me also turn back to our EXCO chair, Shigeru, to give a bit of insight on how our strategic plan's dealing with this.
Thank you very much, Mary Frances, and thank you for your question on our strategic plan. And I think the issues, all issues that will be central to our strategic plan, these are some of the main issues you mentioned are all central to our sort of plan, and a number of which have been issues we have been working on for a number of years. So it's not just a one-off thing. We are working in terms of a continuous sort of discussion on these points. And this highlights that while our focus of our work will pivot from policy development to implementation, there will also be quite a degree of continuity in our work. But as I mentioned in my remark, one of the key shifts in our work will be increased focus on the important societal role that insurance has to play. And this trend, this sort of represents a trend in our work, which will be articulated more explicitly in our strategic plan, and therefore our work in the coming years. As a result of our work on some of these broader issues, we expect our work to result in engagement with a wider group of stakeholders moving forward, because we think that if the insurance sector or the supervisors and regulators will be more involved in societal responsibility, it would be very important for us to engage with a wider range of stakeholders moving forward. And if we are thinking about fulfilling societal responsibilities, that will mean that we need to engage with those who actually make the policies. So as supervisors and regulators, we need to be more inclusive, and we need to be a bit more proactive in making sure that we play our role, important role in in addressing societal challenges. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Shigeru. And then one last question before we open up the floor, and that is from also a steady partner of the IAIS in the International Actuarial Association, and I think we have Nick Dexter with us. Hello, Nick.
Yes, thanks, Jonathan. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. The IAA has been very pleased to hear about the initiative that you've several speakers have talked about on the supporting insurers to serve. As I think you know, the IAA is very active in this area. We've got a micro insurance group that's looking at that side of things, but we've also had for a few years now a pandemic working group, which is currently looking at the role actuaries can play in reducing and minimizing protection gaps. We'll be publishing the next report on this work very shortly. So having said that, we'd be interested in hearing your views on the role that you see actuaries playing in supporting you in this work.
Great. So I know Siham touched on this topic and the importance to emerging markets as well. So and also as part of our implementation work is involved in the work that we do with the IAA. So Siham, maybe you can deal with this one.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nick, and happy to answer that. Actuaries have an important role to play in helping insurers and supervisors to clearly understand what is and is not insurable in the face of protection gaps that we expect to grow even further as the full impact of climate change is felt. In my opinion, I think that particular support is needed for EMDs, which may have fewer resources and skills, but will be the most affected by climate change. As our call to action report highlighted, addressing protection gaps requires a multi-stakeholder approach, and it starts with a clear understanding of what is possible for insurers to underwrite as risks continue to evolve. Actuaries have an important role to play here in supporting efforts in sizing protection gaps and in supporting effort to understand what risk prevention measures can help to reduce insured losses. I'm particularly pleased with the work done in partnership with the International Actuarial Association, IAIS and IAIS, which has allowed us to equip supervisors across the world, in particular EMDE, with the necessary skills to leverage actuarial capacities. We are grateful for the leadership of the International Actuarial Association has shown in helping to address these issues. I'm aware that the IAA is continuing to undertake work looking at protection gaps and look forward to following this work. Thank you very much.
Great. Yes, very much look forward to that and partnering with yourselves, Nick. Great. Well, let's turn now. We've got half an hour left to the audience Q&A. A reminder, you can either put your hand up, your virtual hand up, or you can send some questions on the chat. We've got a couple so far. So let me start with one that is that I will be sending your way, Petra, as chair of our FinTech Forum, which is from Peter Kochenberger from the Southern University Law Center, and of course also a big long-time consumer representative in the IAIS's work as well. I think, let me check, are we going to be able to open up to Peter, or I can read the question. Okay, let me read the question. I think that's the best way. So the question is from Peter, could you elaborate a bit more on what redress for consumers means in the fintech world?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Peter, for the question. Actually, when I said the word, I literally thought, I hope that is a clear word. For me, as a not native speaker, I also had to look it up. But what redress is that, and it's a very important part of conduct supervision, is that if a consumer has a complaint about the product, they need to actually be able to contact the insurer or the distributor, an intermediary. They need to be able to share that complaint, and then they need to get a response. And that response, of course, needs to address the concerns they have, because it's a redress. So that is how you think about that. Now, in a digital world, why would that need extra attention? That has to do with the fact that, first of all, with more digital online sales, in the case of an issue, are you able to actually talk to a person? Are you able to get connected with someone representing the insurer or the intermediary that sold you the product to have a discussion? Or are you talking to a chat box? That's the first. And second is, what kind of response do you get? An unacceptable response is that a computer just sends a standard email that a person tells you, but this is what the computer said, and I can't explain it. That links back to explainability of AI. So the need for an insurer, but also an intermediary to be able to actually be reachable for complaints, to explain also why a certain decision was taken. For example, you are not getting the product, you are not accepted as a client, you're excluded. Why was that? That cannot be because the computer told me so. That is because there is an explanation. And that is the redress part, which will get extra attention of us, also in the application paper that we are drafting, because this is an essential part of ensuring that consumers are protected, but also, I think in general, consumers continue to feel comfortable with the service provided by an insurer, and therefore continue to trust in insurance products. So this is something you need to organize as an industry, and it's something that supervisors need to look at. And I hope that that clarifies it for you.
Very good. Thank you, Petra. And then we have another question that's come through the chat, and this is turning a little bit back to the discussion on ICS implementation. And we have a question that comes in from Asuris, which is around how does the IAIS intend to deal with jurisdictions that are hesitant to adopt ICS, such as North American jurisdictions. So, well, I can touch a little bit on that in my capacity as chair of the aggregation method comparability assessment team, but I'll also hand over to our EXCO chair Shigeru there, because you know, the one thing I wanted to add, of course, is that it depends which jurisdiction you're talking about, because of course within the US. Our US members are aiming to implement the ICS in the form of an aggregation method, so not the group-wide consolidated approach to capital requirements that's in the ICS, but through an aggregation method that aims to provide comparable outcomes to the ICS, and therefore would be seen as an outcome equivalent implementation of the ICS. But that there is a process there, and let me again hand over to the chair of the ICS task force on that one.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's as what Jonathan just mentioned is the way we see it. Of course, the ICS is the global standard in that regard. If there are certain jurisdictions who look to implement it in a different way, that has been the theme for the past several years. What I can say is that everybody on the executive committee understands the importance of this comparability assessment, which aims to look at whether the AAM has any outcome equivalent, is outcome equivalent compared to the ICS. And there has been a lot of discussion and also data collection with this regard. And what I can safely say is that we remain on track. We have had a timeline in place to conduct this comparability assessment in parallel with the finalization of the ICS with regard to its timeline. And we are on track. We remain on track to make a decision on the comparability by the end of the year. And I think everybody is very much engaged around the executive committee on this comparability assessment exercise. So let me stop there. Thanks, Jonathan. Back to you.
No, thank you very much. So that's very clear. And then, of course, other than in the US, where the approach is an outcome equivalent implementation of the ICS, implementation of the ICS remains very much a jurisdictional decision. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a range of jurisdictions, of members of the IAIS who are already in the process of implementing the ICS, but ultimately it is a national decision, and if there is a jurisdiction that decides not to implement their form of the ICS, then that is the same as any other global standard where a jurisdiction may choose not to implement a standard. Of course, they would then be found not to be observant of those standards when it comes to the likes of an IMF or a World Bank financial sector assessment program. But ultimately, that's a jurisdictional decision. We do have one more question through the chat, which is actually on a topic that will be covered a bit more on Thursday, but I think we do have time to touch on it a bit this morning, at the moment. And I believe we have Matt Walker, the chair of the PDC, with us as well, so he can give us a little bit of an early flavour, because the topic is asking about the work that we're doing on operational resilience. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jonathan. And we will cover this more in depth on the session on Thursday, but we are doing quite a bit of work on operational resilience. I'm sure to those of you watching the news, you see this coming up a lot in our increasingly interconnected world, particularly with regards to cyber risk. The IAIS has done a lot of work historically on that with past issues papers and application papers as part of the global monitoring exercise. Most recently released an issue paper in 2023, which looked at cyber resilience, IT, third-party outsourcing, and business continuity management. Some of the feedback we got on that paper urged us to continue taking this work forward in a way that's helpful, particularly in a principles-based method. So we're looking to do that. The first part of this work will be releasing a set of objectives that we think are important to achieve with regards to operational resilience. and how this doesn't set out new supervisory requirements, but rather just elaborates on how existing requirements, particularly in ICP 7 on corporate governance and ICP 8 on risk management, relate to these objectives. And we'll follow that up later with a toolkit for how supervisors, giving examples of how supervisors can achieve these objectives. We're interested for feedback for stakeholders on this important work, and happy to take any further questions on Thursday. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. So good. I don't see any more questions at the moment. So last chance, last opportunity. I mean, what I may ask before we end then, and again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat or raise your virtual hand. But looking ahead a bit to Thursday, as I said, we will have not only Matt as chair of the PDC, but also Dieter Hendricks as chair of the Macroprudential Committee, and Peter Braumüller as chair of the Implementation Assessment Committee, giving a detailed update on their work. But perhaps what we can do is ask them to give a little bit of a 1-minute teaser for Thursday, particularly for those of you who are not able to join on Thursday. You can also get a little bit of a snapshot on that. So I will run alphabetically and turn to Peter Braumüller first. Peter, are you? I will turn to Dieter Hendricks first from the Macroprudential Committee. Over to you, Dieter.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think as you already briefly highlighted at the start of today's Excos dialogue, I think on Thursday the idea is that that will guide us all through where we are in terms of our high-level goal 1. So where are we in terms of our global monitoring exercise? We'll zoom in a little bit into our half-year GMAR, which has recently been published. And what I would like to do as well is to give everyone a flavor of which details we are working on in terms of our 2 main macroprudential risk teams. So those teams are very much in line with last year. So we look at the challenges that are brought by the current macroeconomic environment on the one hand, and we are looking into the structural shifts that we observe in the life insurance sector on the other hand. So these teams are continued from last year's global monitoring exercise, but we are continuing our work into trying to understand them better, trying to go into the details a little bit more, and I hope to give some insights on all of that work on Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks, Dieter. And then over to Matt.
Thanks, Jonathan. As you and Shigeru and Andy have all mentioned, as part of the strategic plan, the IAIS is looking to shift more from policy setting coming out of the global financial crisis into implementation. But we do have a busy 6 months of standard setting ahead of us, so I'll be looking at that mostly on Thursday. In particular, we have an active 6 months planned on ICS. The PDC is busy with trying to finalize the ICS on schedule. Another area that we haven't talked about as much today is on resolution planning, particularly the issues coming out of the targeted jurisdictional assessments and what we've seen in our first round of implementation on the holistic framework. There were a few issues on resolution we're taking a look at, particularly with regards to where resolution plans are required and what kind of powers we expect supervisors to have in this space. We just finished up a consultation on suggested proposed revisions to the holistic framework to account for these. The consultation period just closed, so I can give an update on that on Thursday. And then the other issue I want to update on is the one we already talked about today with operational resilience. So beyond that, happy to take any questions people have on the entirety of our standard setting. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And then last but not least, over to Peter Braumüller from the Implementation Assessment Committee.
Thanks, Jonathan. I try to follow up on Queen Maxima's speech today to the topic of financial inclusion, to talk a little bit on what exactly we are doing in that area as the IAIS and more particularly the ISC. And then another topic that was, I think, raised quite frequently during this discussion today, which is the protection gaps. Talk a little bit about what we are doing as a continued work on protection gaps following the publication of the call for action I will then turn to, of course, an issue which is the very hard and which is quite resource intensive for us in the IC, and that is the implementation assessment. Talk a little bit on what is going on there in the different areas we are covering, both on the member assessment program, the thematic peer reviews, and also the TGAs in the context of the holistic framework. And then I will spend the rest of my presentation with capacity building issues, talking about what we in the IAIS are doing in the area of capacity building, the work of our forums that are under the IAC, and of course, also mentioning the work we do together with our implementation partners like the A2I, FSI, IAA, we have heard today, and the Toronto Center. That is a short preview of what you can expect on Thursday from the implementation and assessment front. Thank you. Back to you, Jonathan.
Great, thanks, Peter. So looking forward to Thursday. I see we have had one more. We've had a hands up in the meantime, and we'll open up the audio, and it is from Hugh Francis, Aviva. Yeah. Hugh, can you hear us? Can you open the lines? Open, Jonathan. I think. There we go. Great.
Hi, John. Yeah, I'm no longer Aviva because I have retired, but
okay.
I'm still interested in what the insurance industry is doing. Just a quick question. Just thinking, there was made of kind of like within the strategy looking at the social or the resilience role of the insurance sector, and that was made in reference to kind of like protection and resilience. Just thinking about what Dieter's talking about in terms of the GMAR work and also the ICS, there's also been lots of discussion in the last few years about the investment role of insurers, whether that's investing to support climate change or investing to support infrastructure, or where because we're uniquely placed. I'm wondering what the scope of that resilience role, whether it's looking particularly at protection, or whether it will consider some of those more holistic issues, so that in the same way we have that balance between consumer protection and product availability, there's also that kind of like balance between our role as investors, as insurers, and also providing that investment resilience, and also making certain their safety and soundness at the same time. So I just wondered how wide that scope of that social resilience area was, and whether it would look at the investment side as well at all.
Excellent. So thank you, Hugh. And first of all, glad to hear that the retirement has eventually arrived, and that hopefully you're taking it a bit easier. And but thanks for the interest still in our work. I'm going to sort of probably open it up to some of the committee chairs to add on that. But I suppose that the short answer is probably yet to be fully determined. So I think it was it Shigeru that mentioned that by Cape Town we should also be able to share more detail about what we envisage being part of our third strategic theme on supporting the societal role of the insurance sector in building resilience. And it's a very good question. Does that also include the long-term investment role of the insurance sector? I think it's something we'll touch on when we meet in September as Executive Committee to discuss the operationalization of our strategic plan. So it's a little bit probably a bit of a watch this space kind of response. But let me see. Let me first see whether Dieter from the MPC perspective, and then maybe also after that Peter, with who obviously where this theme is particularly relevant also to inclusion and protection gap issues. But first over to you, Dieter. Anything to add?
Well, at least what I can add is, you were looking also into these structural shifts, and one of these structural shifts is these investments in alternative assets, which are typically more long-term investments that fit well into the asset liability management of insurers and their long-term liabilities. What we try to do here is take a nuanced position where we, of course, from a prudential perspective, we want to highlight the risks, the potential risks and concerns that we have, the challenges that are brought by these investments. But on the other hand, we also try to highlight how these assets can also benefit the long-term investment strategy of insurers. So at least from that perspective, we try to bring both aspects of these growing investments in alternative assets into the picture, which at least partly, I think, also answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieter, and over to Peter.
Yeah, nothing really to add at this stage from our perspective. I think Dieter covered it quite well, and we see on the particular aspects on what that could have also from our perspective, but not anything really more detailed to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And then maybe a little bit of a last word to our ExCo chair, Shigeru.
I think what you mentioned is a very important question, and it's about how we understand the insurance sector in terms of its role on the asset front, but also there are risks associated with that. So we need to be very careful in our assessment in that regard. So I don't think it's just a trade-off itself, but there are certain aspects that we need to really look into when we think about this issue. And as Dieter mentioned, this might be one of the things that might be worthwhile looking at when we look at the structural shifts in the life insurance sector, such as investment in alternative assets and so forth. But thank you very much for the question, and it raises a very important point for us.
Great. So I think that's all we have time for in terms of the questions, and just really to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm glad we covered a broad range of topics. Hopefully, it felt a little bit like you were in the room, and that we answered questions and that you have about our work and where we will be going forward in the next 6 months. We talked about Thursday already in the committee update, but also a reminder that tomorrow we have 2 panel sessions. One on artificial intelligence, which we already touched on, and we'll dive into that a little bit more around the role of AI in the insurance sector. And the second one on the steps insurers are taking to adjust to the challenging macroeconomic environment, which will include, I'm sure, on the investment side as well. So we can build a bit on the last question there. So if you haven't registered already for tomorrow's session or Thursday's session, there is still time to do so, and you can do so on our website. Also to say, following today's session, you will receive an email with a survey. It will take 30 seconds to complete, so it'd be wonderful if you could provide your feedback. We're very keen to get your feedback on today's ExCo session, the first time we're doing this in a virtual format. And we will continue to strive to improve and take your feedback on board. With that, thank you for what I hope you found to be a very engaging 2 hours. We covered a lot. I look forward to going into it in more detail tomorrow and Thursday. Thank you for your time, and goodbye.